So, after doing this YouTube thing for 2 years, I've decided to bite the bullet once again and watch anime. God, was that ever a mistake? Watching anime in 2020? What the hell was I thinking? I wasn't. That's what. Anyway, that means I had to pick shows. So I used my tried and tested method, of course. Following the aftermath of Californian gender reveal parties, whichever show's name appeared among the death toll were my winners. I'm mostly just relieved hipsters pick odd names for their kids, but damn, did I end up with quite the list this time around. Everybody's favorite bloody AMV babe from the late 2000s is back to test our nerves with Higurashi no Naku Koro ni getting a remake. Shaft revs up Assault Lily Bouquet in a vain attempt to redeem their magical girl street cred from Magia Record, because that's a thing apparently. Majo no Tabitabi looks like a cute twist on the fantasy adventure scene. Filling in the comedy romance quota is Tonikaku Kawaii, a show about a guy proposing to some random girl right before he almost dies. So, the usual. Jujutsu Kaisen is yet another high schooler getting wrapped up in the supernatural, with Mappa behind the wheel this time. Senyoku no Sigrdrifa is another, basically magical girls in the military show, and I'm starting to notice a trend this season. Off-the-wall comedies centered around niche sports have been super popular in recent years, so here's one about rock climbing with Iwa Kakeru, sport climbing girls. New isekais took a bit of a break last season, and we're off to a slow start with Kami-tachi ni Hirowareta Otoko, a series about a guy reincarnated as a young slime-raising hermit who gets pulled into typical isekai shenanigans. Maisetsu is young girls trying stand-up comedy, fitting for a slice-of-life comedy series. Togokobo drops a double whammy on us with Maou-jou de Oyasumi, a comedy fantasy show about a kidnapped princess just trying to sleep. And second on that docket is Ikebukuro Westgate Park, a drama mystery about a guy keeping the peace between rival gangs. Kimi to Boku no Saigo no Senjou Aruiwa Sekai ga Hajimaru Seisen is my standard once-a-season tongue twister, and Silver Link's military fantasy shtick they're wheeling out, but at least they're good at it. Production IG gives us Noblesse, another name I'm going to mispronounce this entire season, about vampires in high school. Akudama Drive is another gang war series, but with a sci-fi spin. Adachi to Shimamura is your basic two friends hanging out, and absolutely nothing more. So ignore that shoujo eye tag, alright? And lastly, Kami-sama ni Natahi has a girl with the powers of God living with a guy on summer vacation. So we know where that'll end up. So just looking at all those, you can tell, I've got a hell of a roster this season. So let's just dive right in. Let's start with Higurashi, a series I was really into in my edgier teenage years, implying I'm not edgy now. Realized how stupid that sounded as soon as I said it. Anyway, this is an adaptation of a popular visual novel turned popular anime, remade into a probably popular anime again. I don't know if they're doing anything different with this one, but I can already tell. I'm going to hate YouTube this season because quote-unquote reaction content wasn't a thing in 2006 when the first anime aired. So expect a bunch of people filming themselves giving shocked faces and whoa, I can't believe that takes on something that's been well known in the weeb lexicon for well over a decade already. For those who didn't decide to look up horror anime and see this at the top of that list, it's pretty classic, utilizing mystery elements to set up a psychological thriller show that delves deep into the darker aspects of human nature with disturbing imagery later on. Looks cute on the surface, but literally nothing's as it seems in Hinamizawa. Get cozy for the cute slice-of-life stuff that gets slowly darker and the subsequent mindfucks that should kick in a few episodes. Oh, something new, I guess, is the art style. It's not bad per se, but holy shit do the character models look off. They're too polished and also simplistic at the same time, with weird facial expressions and awkward proportions. Almost like they tried to be more faithful to the visual novel, I guess. Though the rest of the animation is pretty good overall, with smooth motion and some nice framing. Either way, if you like horror, this is one of the de facto franchises in the medium, and Higurashi was good, so it's cool to see it again. Hate to admit it, but due to nostalgia's sake, which I'm convinced they're banking on, it's got my recommendation. On to something that's actually new, as opposed to me basically reviewing a 14-year-old anime with a new coat of paint. Assault Lily Bouquet is up next. So magical girls join a school to train to fight these invading monsters called Huge. Which I'm sure is a metaphor, but let's not get into that now. And that's just about the definition of what a magical girl show is. What sets it apart is these people have been living with this for 50 years, and the world is in a constant militarized state, using technology to defeat these things. The power comes from a revolutionary magic machine hybrid developed to combat these monsters called charms, and the perfect operator for this technology is, you guessed it, teenage girls. I literally don't question this shit anymore, do I? My main problem with this is the first few seconds of this series are really cool, and then after the OP it just jumps right into the main girl dumping the entire lore of the world onto my face. Like the coldest of bukkake. All as she walks to school, which takes so goddamn long. It's like 3 minutes of her just talking at the audience. If you can get past that, and holy hell is that a chore, you get some, and I swear this isn't a pun, charming interactions with the cast. One thing this series does well is get the collection of personality traits it calls characters endeared to the audience. The girls are the more engaging sort of quirky that brings about a laugh while trying, helped by Shaft's intentionally odd animation choices to bump up the comedy, which makes these interactions pop. The action itself is well choreographed with some excellent camera work backing up the animation, and the CG looks pretty well done, to the point it's only noticeable because it moves so much, matching even the hand-drawn stills. Honestly, I'm impressed by how nice it looks. Stick more to that and let the series introduce its background more organically, and I would be in love with this. Aside from the obvious Yuri undertones, of course. Looking forward to what this brings. So for now, it's got a recommendation. Let's get a little less serious from the dystopian Yuri comedy shit, and more down to earth, with a young witch backpacking through fantasy Europe. Majo no Tabitabi follows Elaina, a girl who read a book when she was a kid and thought being like a witch in that story was just the best career option for her, and devoted herself to that goal. A person settles on a career path that early in life? Idiots. Well, and the rich, I guess. But this is a fantasy series that doesn't rely on our crappy reality and massive COVID-induced recession to bog it down. So she studies her ass off, passes the exam, and gets herself an apprenticeship to become a witch, so she can live her dream and travel. The plot's pretty light in terms of what's happening, but that's not really the draw. It's more of a world-building show. Exploring the magic and setting are the real attraction. If you're a sucker for that stuff like me, it's got appeal. As for the animation, the series looks beautiful. It's from Studio C2C, a company that has a pretty underrated repertoire when it comes to animation. Not all of their series are good, but they generally look nice. These are the people who brought us Hitoribochi, which this series shares in the incredibly expressive character models and detailed backgrounds with, making the whole affair feel grand. And given that this is a fantasy setting, devoting time to developing the minor details helps the world these characters inhabit feel alive. Not to mention, I just love these facial animations, and how much effort was put into conveying the body language. A cute story with an equally cute aesthetic, so it's recommended. So, keeping with that whole cute theme, how about a show with cute literally in the name, with Tonikaku Kawaii? I'm not gonna lie, this one's a bit weird. Being about a kid who was trying way too hard at life to get into the best school he could to set himself up for success, finding a girl who was just way too cute, and dropping all priorities to talk to her. Yeah, love at first sight killing any life plans in this one. Well, not even. As even that gets cut short with the dude getting into an accident and saved by the girl with both of them injured, and him damn near dying in the process. So our protagonist has a weird name, being named NASA, which in Japanese is pronounced like the space agency, and he wants to be a guy people won't laugh at because his name makes him a joke. His dream girl saves his life and he chases her down to propose to her, but she disappears before he even gets her name. Dude wastes the rest of his teenage years trying to find the girl again, but she shows up randomly at some point to actually be his wife. No, like, brought the paperwork over and shit. She's serious about this. It's a sitcom about their married life as a new couple, and has some jokes that actually land. If this is the weakest comedy I get this season, let's just say I won't be disappointed. The art style and direction for this is a cut above most usual comedy anime, while using a pretty simplistic design that doesn't go super hard into the details, it packs some personality into the characters and animation, which is honestly what I'm looking for in shows like this. The direction is markedly better than your standard example in the genre, by using some interesting camera angles and artistic framing. So if you like some slightly absurd humor and people throwing logic to the wind for love, it's a decent choice to follow this season. We're lacking a bit in the shonen department, aren't we? So let's look at Jujutsu Kaisen. So in a world where supernatural monsters called curses attack humans, and people using magic fight these creatures called Jujutsu, our boy Yuji finds a piece of a legendary monster body and absorbs its power to save his friends. With that, he gains the power to fight these curses, while being targeted by them, and the Jujutsu are trying to kill him too since he's technically a curse now. So now he's stuck trying to collect all the pieces of this mummified cadaver to postpone his death sentence. So when he dies, it'll rid the world of the curse he's keeping locked in his body. Is this Naruto? This feels like Naruto. Sorry, I get it. Holding a mythical superpower that's evil and using it for good is a pretty standard story device, as well as giving the character undergoing that a nice underdog arc to follow. The cast is pretty likable actually, not falling into typical obnoxious kind-hearted dope or idiotic brute looking to fight trope like most shonen protagonists do. So there's a plus. Getting into the animation and such, I will say the direction is on point. There's some nice impactful dead space that lets the weight of scenes sink in, and honestly a great use of ambience. That's a bit of a lost art in itself these days. And hey, the line work for the monsters gives an intentionally jarring aesthetic too, giving the impression of more traditional Japanese art for the ancient monstrosities. Animation itself is pretty solid, showing once again MAPPA has the talent to do good work when they try. I'm mostly just happy that's been the case for 2 seasons now, and the camera work in these scenes is really nice. For a shonen anime, this is pretty interesting to pick up, and for fans, it's a must-see. For the average viewer, I'd say give it a watch, if you're looking for light horror elements, that is. I don't know if it's intentional, but a running theme this season seems to be humanity on the brink until someone or something steps in to save the day. And we're getting more of that with Senyoku no Sigrdrifa. So some things called pillars are about to wipe out all life on planet Earth, when the discussion of which god is real is solved by Odin popping in to gift humanity some magical girl fighter pilots with spirit planes to combat this extinction level threat. Enter our main cast. 4 of these Valkyries in Japan, and they've all come down with a bad case of anime protagonist syndrome. Right down to a badass with a survivor's guilt thing going on, a tsundere, an energetic airhead, and a girl who's too nice to everyone and tries to keep the peace. I like the girls flying older style planes, mixing magic and technology to contrast against the modern Air Force though. That adds some personality, at least over the obvious comparison to something like early Air Force from 2019. Dogfights with CG aren't the most engaging action after all, but there's some effort to add tension with camera moves, and the cast has some decent banter. Animation-wise, this one's pretty standard for your typical anime, lacking in style, but pretty dynamic movements and action. I'm kind of impressed with how nice this thing looks, even with all the CG, since it has good pacing and direction. Check it out if you're starved for cute girls doing a war. You know that trend of taking a niche fad in Japan that's gained a lot of traction and throwing a bunch of cute anime girls at it to make a quick buck? And for some reason those shows always do really well? This time it's indoor rock climbing, or bouldering I guess, I don't really care what it's called. With Iwa Kakeru, sport climbing girls. Let's check that out I guess. So our main girl's really good at puzzles, and when she enters high school she finds a new challenge that'll captivate her. Of course, looking at pre-made climbing walls is a puzzle, where picking the fastest route up the wall is an interesting take on the activity. So she joins a club for it, and that's pretty much the entire story. A girl making friends and working at a sport. Is that interesting? Not really. While it's cool to see a more analytical approach to a sport, it still feels like it's trying to cash in on something popular. My main issue is, the character models and animation are generally pretty bad. Like they're all pretty plain. And for a show where the main cast is essentially moving around in a sports bra and underwear, you'd expect them to make them, look good? It reeks of a budget title where they didn't spend a ton of money animating it. And it shows, because there's a lot of holds and camera moves on stills to cut corners. Not to mention the flat shading and high contrast doesn't help much either. Unless you're starved for climbing anime, or maybe, I don't know, a fan of the web manga, it's a pretty easy pass. Back to the isekai grindstone I see, with Kami-tachi ni Hirowareta Otoko. I don't like rehashing the same plot, but that's isekai in a nutshell at this point. So we have a dude in his late 30s dying and some gods reincarnating him into a fantasy world with above average abilities. If this is new to you, welcome back from your coma, and wait until you see what else you've missed this last decade. I don't know what else to really say. Either you like whatever little gimmick this particular isekai has, or you don't. And for this one, he's a slime tamer who got superior physical powers and made some super badass slimes that listen to him. And I guess he's an 11-year-old now who barely remembers how to talk instead of an edgy teenager. The animation isn't anything to write home about either, with average designs, or like anything crazy at all to showcase it, and the plot is just okay. We'll see if it either goes the lazy life is easy route, which is what I'm leaning towards, or doing anything interesting at all. I wouldn't hold your breath though, since it's setting itself up as dude solves all the problems with his God-given talents. Pretty easy pass, I guess. Oh, you know what would be the biggest douchebag thing to do right now? Go on an ad break. That would have just been the worst. Next up, we have Maou-jou de Oyasumi, a fantasy comedy about a girl just trying to get some sleep. So the basic setup here is your standard, goddamn, beyond standard setup of a human country living an obnoxiously happy existence when a super powerful demon king swoops in and captures the human princess. Enter a hero who's off to save her, and that's practically a textbook definition of cliché. The good news is, that's not the story we're getting, because that's played as a farce. I've never been so happy to see a comedy tag before in my life. So while she's abducted by the Demon King, she's treated pretty well, but various things keep her from getting enough sleep. So rather than worry about rescue, her goal becomes to get them Z's, like making a better pillow and such. And while that's subversive as taking a cliched premise and doing something off the wall, like switching the frame of reference and slapping an indifferent protagonist in the role, the constant "I just need more sleep" gets one note pretty quick. The comedy isn't bad, as she plays the demons around her for better bedding, but I feel like the joke drags on too much. The animation is pretty decent for a show like this though, going more for cute fluff that's simplistic in its presentation, but moves surprisingly well with nice comedic timing. And you know, at least the characters are engaging. But whether that saves your enjoyment depends entirely if you like these sort of opposite of what you expect comedies. So you know, it's got a slight recommendation. On to the second half of our Dogo Kobo double feature with Ikebukuro Westgate Park. This is more in their wheelhouse. A serious concept like gang wars and violence that allows the studio to flex its drama muscles. We have our boy Makoto here who runs with some gangs in this crime-ridden city, but he's a bit different, you see. Rather than being a gang member, he mediates the issues between the gangs to keep his friends safe. And that's neat. A guy with connections that can work between the legal and illegal systems. That can mean just talking some stuff out or kicking ass when he needs to. But shit goes downhill with an influx of drugs hitting the streets, causing some new conflicts, which is where the story kicks off. And sadly, the first episode is weak in pretty much every area, and that'll take time to build up, as a lot of this episode was spent establishing the town and relationships. Hell, even the animation was pretty subpar for the usual stuff Dogo Kobo puts out, with some muddy line work, stiff movements, and a lot of CG to save time. None of that ruined it, but it definitely felt like they weren't trying. Whether you should watch it depends if you're down for a slower sort of story and detective-style mystery elements. For me, it's just interesting enough to stick around with for a bit longer. Want a romance that's not so goofy this season? Then let's look at Kimi to Boku no Saigo no Senjou, Aruiwa Sekai ga Hajimaru Seisen. Though because I'm not a masochist, we're going with our Last Crusade or the Rise of a New World. So this is your typical Romeo and Juliet story, with a kingdom of magic at war with a kingdom of technology. And the princess from one falls for a knight from the other. I know that description sounds goofy, but this is Silverlink. Have some hope. The background of this series was set up quick with why these people are at war, with the magical power being usable by some and the Empire kicking those people out because they abused it. Now, I wouldn't take that at face value. It is implied that both sides wrote their own versions of history to vilify the other, so one feels oppressed and the other feels like it was for self-defense. And that's actually a pretty believable conflict. The Empire's youngest knight meets with the Witch Sovereignty's princess, and the two are quite taken with one another after a short fight. And that forms the central romance plot that the series looks like it's going to follow. The supporting cast has some good banter too, keeping it from getting dull. I'd say there's a lot of balls in the air, but they're in order at least, where the show looks like it's focusing on its characters and their struggles first. Animation-wise, it's on the good side of average, as I mostly expect from Silver Link, with a bump in quality for the action. Movements are fluid, and some heavy hits are bolstered by brief lulls, which is good. Now the main guy is kind of a trump card badass, which feels a little lame, but the princess isn't a pushover either, so I don't hate it. Check it out if you're looking for some fantasy action with a purpose. I guess it is October when this video's coming out, so I think that gives us license to be spooky. And let's do so by looking at Noblesse. If you thought the Korean domination of pop culture stopped at music, you'd be wrong, as this is yet another webtoon comic adaptation brought to you by Crunchyroll. Enter our main dude Rai, who's the purest of pureblood nobility, who's awake after centuries of sleep and has to go to high school to catch up on all humanity's been up to. There he befriends some kids rather than being the distant loner all the girls swoon over. And in the background there's this group using science to modify humans or vampires, I don't really know or care which, called the Union. And that makes Rai their new target. Yeah, I know. The plot's all over the place. And while it has threads that seemingly do link together, the first episode is chaotic as hell trying to introduce these concepts to us. I was getting some tonal whiplash between the super serious murder spree stuff at the start and the slice of life school stuff in the middle. For the animation, it's, not great. The character models don't seem to fit with the background since they're so dark and rigid. I mean, just look at this line work, while the school and such are soft and bright. Then there's the framing, which is a little awkward, as the show sticks to wider shots when close-ups would build more tension. Overall, I'm just not impressed. Honestly, I would give it a pass. But if you're really thirsty for a good boy vampire protecting humans because who else will, give it a watch. Did you get your fill of gangs? No? Good, because Akudama Drive is up next. In Japan, where war broke out between Kansai and Kanto, that's basically the Kyoto area and Tokyo area for you low-tier weebs, which led to Kansai becoming a vassal state of Kanto. There, the government and police basically lost control, and that's when criminals known as Akudama grew to prominence. This is where our main character, an ordinary girl, gets pulled into a world of crime. And with that basic premise out of the way, holy shit does this one sell its setting within the first few seconds, with tons of holograms in an otherwise dirty city, pushing that cyberpunk aesthetic hard. Plus introducing the main character organically by showing us the type of person she is without using any sort of exposition on how she's just a normal person, or the world she lives in. The first few minutes we know she's an honest, hardworking, and thoughtful person, if not a bit oblivious. And a touch of unlucky too, which is honestly cool to see a series confident enough in its audience to trust that we'll get those cues. For animation, holy hell, Studio Period knocked this out of the park. Seamless blending between smart use of CG on wides to traditional animation on close-ups, absolutely amazing camera work, and incredibly stylized cutaways. The only drawback is, well, the censorship, and that'll most likely be gone with the Blu-ray release. Even the moment-to-moment stuff on this just looks good. Like literally. This whole bike sequence is just the right sort of batshit insane that sells a show. So good storytelling backed by really nice animation? Yeah, this is easily recommended to watch this season. We have a show with Yuri subtext already, but Adachi to Shimamura is when we shift to plain text. A slice-of-life romance story between the two leads. Adachi and Shimamura, friends in high school who waste their time by playing table tennis together and talking about pointless stuff while skipping class. This is a pretty relaxing show to kick back and watch if you're looking for some cute romance fluff between two friends. Also not heavy on drama or undercutting itself with comedy at the expense of the pairing. I like the art style. especially around the eyes. It really gives a manga aesthetic in that area, leading to some nice expressiveness. The darker color palette is a bit refreshing for a lighter show like this, giving it more personality than one would expect. But for animation, it's about what you would expect for a romance show, meaning a lot of facial animation and not much else. The cutaways to build tension while conveying character moods are a bit hit and miss, as the show is leaning heavy into the table tennis metaphor a tad too much for my taste. A ball hovering in air with a paddle hit sound effect isn't really saying a lot, so it just feels needlessly pretentious. I had that same issue with Bloom Into You back in 2018, but I ended up liking that show, so we'll see where this one ends up. Recommended for the ever-thirsty Yuri fan, or for those just looking for more romance on the lighter side. Want some more drama stuff? Kami-sama ni Natahi has your back, with a guy in high school stumbling on a little girl who claims that she's the god of omniscience. So she tells him the world will end in 30 days, and that's when he'd rightly assume that she's batshit insane. But when she demonstrates her amazing predictive abilities to him, he's suddenly a believer. She moves in with him to spend the remaining summer having a good time. But probably not. Okay, ignoring the small child moving in with a teenage stranger, Japan has a knack for taking off-the-wall shit and playing it dead serious, for better or worse. Yeah, I get it, it's not ecchi, but how else does this look? Anyway, all snark aside, this one's pretty interesting to say the least. The characters have a nice back and forth with the titular god Odin giving some great responses, mostly because it leans heavy into the kid with severe chubio. It does a lot by just focusing on the characters, and I think that makes it more personal. I like how not flashy this series is with its premise, making it feel grounded, which leaves the cast feeling relatable through the story. With the impending end of the world on the horizon, it leaves a ton of room for the cast to develop. I'm looking forward to that. For the look of this series, while it doesn't have a distinct style, it's incredibly well animated, using great camera work to add weight to scenes, nice artistic framing that gives an otherwise plain aesthetic more personality, not to mention the comedic timing is on point to lighten the mood when it needs it. This easily could have been garbage, but I'm leaning towards this ending up being one of the better shows this season as long as it stays on the path and gives a good payoff. When was the last time Moe made you laugh? No, I mean intentionally. Maisetsu is a show about 4 girls trying to break into the Japanese entertainment industry. While they were decently funny in high school, the group isn't having a ton of luck catching any breaks outside of being the class clowns now that they've graduated. Not much to really say in the plot department since it's a slice-of-life comedy show, specifically a comedy show about Japanese stand-up comedy. And the humor is, not gonna lie, pretty cringy. Mostly because the main girl, Maou-jou, can't read the audience sometimes and embarrasses herself with incredibly dated impressions. But other than that, they have a decent back and forth, and that makes them entertaining to watch. Which is what I'd hope for. Since the core cast is 2 comedic duos by trade, that's sort of necessary. The style for this is actually decent, if not a bit derivative. Yeah, I'll admit, it looks a lot like Lucky Star. And that's not at all helped by the characters referencing Lucky Star, so yeah. The cast all have striking designs that do look cute. That's what they're going for, after all. But for a comedy show like this that relies on deformation into chibi and really cartoonish expressions, I'd say it mostly looks passable at its worst. From an actual animation standpoint, it's bare bones. But that's because it doesn't need to be complex. If the art can look nice while doing just enough to emphasize the humor, it's doing its job. And hey look, that's what this is doing. If you're in need of a less gimmicky comedy show this season, this is a pretty easy pickup. After taking a look at what's out this season, I think we've got a pretty good lineup. Most of these shows I actually enjoyed unironically from the start. And besides, there's plenty in terms of comedy, action, mystery, horror, and drama. But on top of that, this season's looking good too, with some amazing art style and animation. And if this is how we're wrapping up this godforsaken year, then I'd call that a plus. Though, I'm not getting my hopes up, and we'll see if it can follow through with all this promise. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description. And if you really like what I put out and want to support me directly, you can head on over to my Patreon to pick up some extra perks like voting on what I do next. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Volcarona for their continued support. Thanks for watching.